Hi, everyone. How are you today? It's nice to see you, and thank you so much for having me over here again. Always look forward to our chats together. A couple of things I'd like to start out with today, a few announcements of sorts. First off is I want to talk a little bit about the elections that took place in Honduras. The people of Honduras, exercised their democratic rights by taking part in elections on Sunday, November the 26th. The United States looks forward to working with the democratically elected leaders of Honduras. We await the final tabulation of results by election authorities and urge the authorities to complete their work without undue delay. The United States urges calm and patience as the results are tabulated. It's critical that Honduran election authorities be able to work in a free and transparent manner without interference. We urge all candidates to respect the results once those results are announced. The United States commends the efforts of the independent election observers from the Organization of American States and the European Union and awaits their final assessment of the Honduran electoral process. Secondly, you may have heard last evening there was a verdict in the case of Ahmed Abu Khattala in the trial of the terrorist attacks in Benghazi, Libya. This is something that is important to our colleagues, in particular at the State Department, since we lost 4 lives that evening. We would like to express our continued gratitude to the U.S. military, to law enforcement and intelligence community for their relentless efforts to bring to justice the perpetrators of the tragic September 11, 2012 terror attacks on U.S. diplomatic facilities in Benghazi, Libya. We continue to mourn the loss of Ambassador Chris Stevens, Glenn Doherty, Sean Smith, and Tyrone Woods. The arrest and prosecution of Ahmed Abu Khattala were critical steps to ensure that justice is served for those dedicated Americans and public servants. Each sacrificed their lives for promoting American ideals abroad. Their State Department colleagues serving around the world today continue that important work in the same spirit and in their honor. And finally, I know something that a lot of people are watching so carefully today, and that is what happened yesterday from North Korea. As you know, the early afternoon hours on November 28th, North Korea flight tested a ballistic missile from a location north of Pyongyang. The missile flew 700 kilometers downrange before it splashed down in the Sea of Japan. The United States strongly condemns North Korea's launch of a likely intercontinental ballistic missile into the Sea of Japan, indiscriminately threatening its neighbors, the region, and global peace and security. The DPRK's relentless and unlawful pursuit of nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them must be reversed. Together with the international community, we must send a unified message to North Korea that it must abandon its weapons of mass destruction programs. All nations must take maximum economic and diplomatic measures to increase pressure on the North Korean regime. As Secretary Tillerson has said, diplomatic options remain viable and open. The United States remains committed to finding a peaceful path to denuclearization and to ending the belligerent actions by North Korea. Our goal for the pressure campaign, in which the entire world has now joined us, is to persuade the regime it needs to reconsider the path it is currently on and think about engaging in a meaningful dialogue about a different future. The President spoke today to the South Korean President Moon and also to Japanese Prime Minister Abe, and today called the Chinese President Xi this morning. In addition to those calls, the Secretary Tillerson, spoke with Foreign Minister Kang, Japanese Foreign Minister Kono, and Canadian Foreign Minister Freeland to discuss how the global community can counter North Korea's threat to international peace. Additionally, at the invitation of Japan, Secretary Tillerson will attend the UN Security Council meeting, which is likely to take place on December 15th for the Security Council to discuss the matter of North Korea. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions. And Benjamin's going to help facilitate since I don't know all of you. So.
All right, and a quick reminder of our rules of operation. We have 2 microphones out on the floor. When you get the microphone, please identify yourself by name and outlet, and please limit yourself to 1 question. Why don't we start with DPRK?
And if I may just add, let's try to group the countries, nations, and issues together. So, well, let's cover DPRK first. And, sir, if you wouldn't mind telling me your name and your news organization.
Yes, my name is Kyu-Seok Jang from Christian Broadcasting System.
Okay, great. Nice to have you here.
Yeah, about the DPRK. Yeah. And Mr. President said yesterday that nothing has changed. I think that means you are going to continue the maximum pressure campaign against North Korea.
Yeah.
But yesterday, North Korea argued that they have completed their nuke power. And so do you think they have passed the red line, or can it be a game changer that you may have changed the approach to North Korea? Also, yeah, how do you assess their argument?
Okay. Let me start with the first part, our current assessment of the situation and what we plan to do. At the State Department, our approach is diplomacy. Obviously, what happened yesterday is of great concern, not just to the United States, but the entire world. We have seen 2 successful UN Security Council resolutions that were unanimously passed late summer and over the fall, including Russia and China as members of that. We have put together our maximum pressure campaign, which many nations have taken part in. That campaign consists of the United States and many other nations issuing sanctions. In addition to that, we have asked, not just the United States, but these other countries, to shrink the size of the North Korean footprint in many other countries. In addition to that, we've asked other nations to kick out North Korean guest workers, simply because those North Korean guest workers are essentially working as slave laborers. They don't get to keep the money that they make. Much of that money goes back to North Korea, and we recognize that that money, as it doesn't go home to their families, we see the conditions of the people, we see the humanitarian rights issues in North Korea. Their people are starving. You've heard about the tapeworms and things like that in people's bodies and the malnutrition. That money, instead of going to the people, goes to the nuclear and ballistic missile weapons programs. Part of our maximum pressure campaign is to choke off that money supply that goes into the North Korean regime. We have seen more than 20 countries around the world jump on board that maximum pressure campaign and start to take place with those activities, shrinking the North Korean guest workers, kicking out ambassadors, those types of things. We regard that campaign as being successful, but the entire world acknowledges that this is not something that will necessarily change overnight. That campaign is a long effort, and we will continue to push ahead with that. Obviously, this new development is something that's very serious. The Secretary, as well as the President, got on the phone yesterday and made a series of calls about what is next. Many of you know what is happening later today, UN Security Council meeting that will take place. I can't comment too much on that meeting because I will leave that to my colleagues at the United Nations, at the UN office there to handle much of that. In addition to that, the Secretary spoke yesterday about additional measures that could enhance maritime security. Some of this information is just being pulled together at this time, but it would essentially include the right to interdict transporting goods to and from North Korea. That could be a major new pressure point that could help in this overall campaign. In addition to this, the United States, in partnership with Canada, will convene a meeting of the United Nations Command Sending States. It would also include the Republic of Korea and also Japan. Those are things that the Secretary brought up with his counterparts yesterday. We are looking to expand our diplomatic campaign to try to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. That is something that we are committed to as this administration as a top national security issue.
Still on North Korea?
Sorry, that was a little long.
North Korea?
Yes.
Hi.
Thank you. My name is Carsten von Namen. I work for Deutsche Welle, German international public service broadcaster. My question concerns the issue of ambassadors you just mentioned in North Korea. One of the countries that do have an ambassador there is Germany, a close ally of the US. Would you also want Germany to recall the ambassador or end diplomatic relations, or is that maybe an important channel of communication also for the U.S.?
That's a good question. I know when we spoke with your foreign minister, Gabriel, I recall this in the spring, sitting in a meeting with him, they had a conversation, he and the secretary did, about that hostel in Berlin, if I recall. I think it was Berlin, is that correct? Yeah. Where I believe it was your government brought that to our attention. Again, I'm going back just by memory, but I recall they brought that to our attention and said, you know, we have all these North Korean guest workers working here, and these people are not keeping their own money. It's going back to North Korea. So in that instance, we found the government of Germany to be helpful in this. We recognize, and I think many of your nations do as well, that North Korea is tormenting not just the region, but the entire world. And they threaten not just the region, but the entire world. So we would continue to ask Germany or other countries around the world to recall those ambassadors, shrink the footprint of the size of entity that North Korea has in any given country. So that's a campaign. We continue to have those conversations with many nations.
A couple more on North Korea. Still on DPRK. Ma'am?
Thank you.
Hi.
Jessica Galata with the Yomiuri Shimbun Japanese newspaper. Do you have any updates on Ambassador Yoon's meetings with his South Korean counterpart?
So Ambassador Yoon met with his South Korean counterpart yesterday. Unfortunately, I don't have a readout of that meeting. He has many conversations, a lot of various diplomatic dialogues with his counterparts overseas. I just don't have anything new for you on that. However, I would have to imagine that that meeting covered the topic of the day, and that is North Korea's belligerent actions.
It's on North Korea?
Yeah, one more on North Korea.
One more on North Korea.
Yeah.
So we've mentioned the maximum pressure campaign, but
Name
oh,
it.
sorry, I'm Aaron Maisler with Fuji TV.
Hi, Aaron.
So we're talking about the maximum pressure campaign, but China is the major supporter of North Korea. Do we have a plan on what we want to do with China? We just introduced new sanctions. There has been information in the past that China's been spotty with enforcing their sanctions. There's been data from Reuters that we've seen a significant decrease in trade recently involving China. Trump announced today he's talked to President Xi about new sanctions. What is our plan in regards to China and cooperating with them?
Yeah, our plan continues, and we say this to China, we say it to other countries as well. Russia would be one that would be included in that. China, I want to remind you, was one of the UN Security Council resolution backers the last 2 times that passed unanimously. So with China, with Russia, with other countries, we would say, go ahead and continue implementing, as they say they are, all the UN Security Council resolutions. Implement those fully and enforce them. That is something that we expect nations that sign on to that vote for the UN Security Council resolutions, will go ahead and do. So that would be the first thing. China has unique leverage with North Korea. We recognize that through trade. Russia is also another country that has some unique leverage with China. So we encourage China to use that leverage. We have a good dialogue with China. As many of you know, we had the 4 dialogues with China this year, and that culminated in the final meeting where the President and the Secretary went to Beijing. So like with other countries, we recognize that China can do more, many countries can do more, but China recognizes, we believe, the threat that North Korea poses. We believe they do. They have said to us in the past that they share our commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and we expect that they will adhere to that and follow through.
Okay, new topic.
Okay.
Or do you want to do one more on DPRK?
Oh, we can do one more on DPRK.
One more on DPRK.
Okay.
Hi, Chen Liu from China's Xinhua News Agency. Well, since the denuclearization is the final goal for all of the parties, so won't the U.S. think that the suspension, the 2 suspension theory or the policies that China raised could be a possible way to solve this problem?
I'm sorry, the 2 what?
Suspensions, like the
You mean freeze for freeze?
The freeze for freeze.
Got it.
Policy could just solve the problem, like the U.S. could consider next month just stop the military drill with the South Korea.
I know that some countries like to bring up this idea that a freeze for freeze might actually work, that might give Kim Jong-un the shove that he needs to denuclearize, right? People ask that question. There is no, and I want to be very clear about this, there is absolutely no equivalency between the activities, the legal activities that the United States and the Republic of Korea's alliance has. We have a lawful, long-standing, defense-oriented military exercise that takes place. This contrasts that to what the DPRK is doing. What they are doing is unlawful. They're unlawful nuclear and ballistic missile programs that the world is against. When we do our freedom of navigation operations, when we do military exercises with our allies, we do these around the world. We don't just do this in that neighborhood. We do this around the world. They're legal, they're lawful, they're carried out in the spirit of the October 1st, 1953 U.S.-South Korean Mutual Defense Treaty. They're not only carefully monitored by the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, but they ensure full compliance with the Armistice Agreement. Okay. Yes, sir. Hi.
Hi, Philippe Gélier with Le Figaro of France. How do you start a meaningful dialogue without first having a freeze for freeze?
Oh, goodness. Look, North Korea, pardon me, is showing no interest in sitting down and having conversations with the world at this point. When they shoot off ballistic weapons, when they do advanced nuclear tests, they are not indicating that they are serious about denuclearization. This is not just the United States calling for this. This is the entire world calling for this.
Which topic?
Okay.
Rina.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Reena Bhardwaj from CNN News 18 India. I also represent ANI.
Hi.
Just a quick question on North Korea. When Secretary Tillerson was in India, Sushma Swaraj did say that the diplomatic channels with North Korea would continue. The embassy would be there. Would you also consider talking to India all over again? And my second question is, of course, on GES.
Let me address your first one before I get to the second one. We have a wonderful relationship with Prime Minister Modi and the government of India. A part of our constant conversations with those nations is do more to help with North Korea. Do more to help. It is a global problem. It is a global threat. We hope that India will do more, and we'll continue to have those conversations with the government. Go ahead. You have GES.
Ivanka Trump is, of course, in India. Her, visit to India. How do you gauge that? Is it beyond expectations? Do you think it was successful? A visit to India?
First, I want to say I'm so proud that the United States and India held the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Hyderabad. We are also proud that Ivanka Trump, the president's, not only his daughter, but also one of his trusted, closest advisors, led the U.S. delegation over there. I can personally think of no better representative of a woman entrepreneur in the United States than her to go over there. She was invited personally by the Prime Minister to spearhead our delegation. The State Department, as some of you may know, was very involved in helping to facilitate all of this. We have a bunch of people on the ground there. I think it is a tremendous success when we bring in 1,500 entrepreneurs from around the world. Our embassies helped nominate, if I understand that correctly, many of the entrepreneurs from around the world, picking entrepreneurs, saying, we would like to help you get to India to be able to talk about the great work that you're doing, the jobs that you are growing. Part of the theory behind that is women's empowerment and getting more women into the workforce, but helping them succeed in growing companies, finding investors for those companies. So we're very pleased with it that we brought in 1,500. More than half of those are women.
Still on GES? Anyone on GES?
Anything else on India?
GES. Anything?
Okay. No, nothing on India. Okay. Go right ahead. Okay.
All right.
I thought we finished. We finished with Asia already.
Take Syria.
Okay, let's go to Syria.
Jafar al-Jafari with Al-Mayadeen.
Yeah, hi, sir. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you, too. The status of the U.S. forces in Syria is somewhat murky. There's no legal basis for those forces, at least from the international law of the United Nations. And the government of Syria has called...
Sir, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there because I can only speak on behalf of the State Department, and Department of Defense would handle all of those issues. So I'm not authorized to speak about
my question is
true presence.
Concerning a statement Deputy Assistant Secretary of State John Polashek made on October the 26th in this town. When she was asked about the status of U.S. forces, she said that they would be withdrawing from Syria once ISIS was defeated. Now that ISIS has been defeated, is there a timeline? And what is the timeline for U.S. forces?
Okay, I can't give you a timeline for U.S. forces. Again, that would be a Department of Defense decision and all of that. I can tell you why we're in Syria, why the United States and the 73 members of the de-ISIS coalition, that, by the way, includes nations, but also international organizations such as NATO and others. We are in Syria to defeat ISIS for no other reason. We have seen, sir, I imagine you've seen, are you from Syria? No. From Palestine, okay. Many of us have seen the horrible things that have happened in Syria as a result of Bashar al-Assad, as a result of ISIS. The United States wants to stop that. The global coalition wants to stop that. While Raqqa fell, and that was significant, we still have a lot of work to do. The United States has given a lot of money. We have people there on the ground who are engaged in demining activities. We've seen the booby traps that have been set by ISIS. We've seen what they've done to schools, what they've done to homes, what they've done to families and children, and the killing still continues. So the United States hopes to facilitate the Geneva talks. That is something that is important. We remain committed to that. We believe that the ultimately what happens will be a political resolution in Syria, that the Syrians, when they're able to decide, will be able to decide that on their own. But we're a long way off from that. The reason we are in Syria, though, is to defeat ISIS. Okay. Anything
China.
else on Syria?
Sorry, Syria.
Okay.
Syria?
Pardon me.
China.
Okay.
I have a question about China. Thank you. I'm Shirley from China Central Television. So as we know, it's nearly at the end of the year, and when we look back, we can see the bilateral meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Trump in Mar-a-Lago, the meeting in April, and also Trump's visit to China in November. So how do you evaluate China relations this year especially, and what impressed you most among all these kind of dialogues you mentioned and meetings? Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me start by saying we had the series of 4 comprehensive dialogues, which is something that the President Trump, had outlined with President Xi at Mar-a-Lago. I believe it was in April or May of earlier this year. We had 4 of those dialogues that had taken place in Florida, in China, in the United States, and all of that, which is pretty significant considering how long it takes to get to China and to the United States. We have a strong relationship with China. It is a results-oriented relationship. It's a constructive bilateral relationship. We've had areas of cooperation, but also areas of tension, as we do with other countries. We will continue to work with the government of China to address trade imbalances, the threats to the United States and regional security, also the global challenges, including the threat of terrorism. I want to make something clear that when we disagree with nations such as China, we raise those concerns consistently in a forthright fashion and forcefully, whether or not it's on trade, security issues, South China Sea, or the matter of human rights. So I'd say we have a strong relationship with the government of China. I know that the President and the First Lady and Secretary Tillerson had a very nice trip there, and I know they look forward to it, and we look forward to working with the government. Okay. Yes. Hi.
Let's do
Yes.
Ethiopia, please.
Oh, but go ahead. Let's just
one
more. Let's do another China, and then we'll get over.
Okay.
Okay. Ma'am, sorry.
Hi, Nadia Chow, Washington correspondent for Liberty Times Taiwan. On human rights dialogue, can you update us? In the past years, what's the major topic between U.S. and China on human rights? In the past, you may urge China to release some prominent dissidents, but what Trump administration has accomplished so far? And the follow-up question is, the NGO worker from Taiwan has been sentenced to 5 years by Chinese government for the subversion of the nation. I wonder if you have any, response to this case, and has ever, U.S. talked with the Chinese on this specific case? Thank you.
Tell me the name of the person you mentioned.
Li Mingzhe.
Li Mingzhe, yes. So he's been sentenced to 5 years in prison on what we consider to be vague charges of subversion of power. We are urging the Chinese authorities to release Mr. Li and allow him to return to his family. And that's all I have for you on that case.
How about the U.S. and China human rights?
Yeah. I mean, human rights is a core American value and a core right that we believe people all around the world possess. That is something that we continue to have conversations with the government of China and many other nations as well, where there are human rights issues. In terms of the specifics, a lot of those are private diplomatic conversations. There are some nations where we will not call them out publicly on some of these things because we believe that we can be the most effective behind the scenes. So I don't have anything for you that I can provide you in terms of specifics because that would be a private diplomatic conversation, but I can assure you that the President, the Vice President, and also Secretary Tillerson consistently have those conversations with China. Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
Hi, Heather.
Hi, Dimitri.
I have this.
Where you been hiding out? I haven't seen you in a while.
Just swamped. Just swamped. With work.
Well, you're in the right city then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, I have this softball question about.
You never do.
About about next.
Dimitri's from Russia. You can't tell.
Secretary Tillerson all but announced his trip next week to ministerials in Brussels and Vienna, to NATO and OSCE. I wanted to ask if he is meeting, if there is a plan to meet with Foreign Minister Lavrov in Vienna.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that we have announced, it's okay, we've announced, the Secretary discussed that he will be going to Europe next week. We are still working out the exact details of that meeting and the meeting schedule that he will have, so I just don't have any specifics for you on that. But as soon as we have that all nailed down, then I'll be sure to let you all know.
And if I can also
Yes.
ask you about North Korea, the interdiction measure that you mentioned, and which was mentioned yesterday in the statement. Have you run this idea by the Chinese and the Russians?
I know that we have, let me check something quickly. I believe the Secretary has some calls with China and Russia pending, so I don't have an answer for you on that. As you know, this was a new announcement yesterday as we talk about interdiction. However, the issue of maritime interdiction was incorporated into one of the last UN Security Council resolutions. So there is language that pertains to the maritime interdictions. It appears that this will be a new level of maritime interdictions, but yet some of those details are still being worked out. I don't want to get ahead of the Secretary's calls that he has pending with other foreign leaders or those conversations. Okay.
Peter, nice to see you again.
Hi, sir.
My name is Masim Bazou from TG Ethiopian Television and Radio. I have a question about Ethiopia and Egypt. The Ethiopian Nile River Dam threatens war between Egypt and Ethiopia. And as we heard, Ethiopia also blames Egypt that Egypt has begun a covert war against Ethiopia to disrupt the construction of the Nile Dam, which Egypt denies. Egypt fears that Ethiopian dam will cut into its water supply. But Ethiopia often says that the dam is essential to its development and has repeatedly sought to assure Egypt. But recently, Egyptian President El-Sisi stated that water is a matter of life and death. No one can touch Egypt's shares of water. Despite President's talk, Ethiopia is finalizing the construction of the Nile Dam on the Blue Nile. Instead of provocations of a water war, these two countries must resolve a long-running Nile water dispute through dialogue. Since Ethiopia and Egypt, as you know, are strong allies of the United States, so far, what are the U.S. efforts to assist both countries so that they resolve the Blue Nile Dam conflict peacefully?
Well, first let me say, we recognize, the United States recognizes what an important matter water rights and water issues are. I have a quick question for you, and then I'll answer. To what extent is this being reported? You're from Ethiopia. Yes. How big of an issue is this? Do people, regular folks in Ethiopia regard this?
Oh, it's really a very, very, very big issue.
It gets a lot of coverage.
It's a lot of coverage, and even right now, most people in Ethiopia, even Ethiopians who live abroad, they say that in order to disrupt the Nile construction, as you know, Ethiopia, there is a lot of unrest, a lot of movement going on, which ended up
a big deal.
A big deal.
I understand.
And a lot of people are dying because of, but now they complain that Egypt is behind it. But as I say, my question is, before it gets out of hand, what is the United States doing to assist both countries?
Here's what I can tell you. Dams play an important role in managing water resources and meeting energy needs as well. At the same time, they can have a profound impact on people and also the environment. Any decision concerning the dams must be based on best science available and made in the best interests of the affected population and should incorporate the views of all stakeholders. That would include both Egypt and Ethiopia. We do not have a position on the Comprehensive Framework Agreement, known as the CFA, but we do believe that the management of shared water must be done on a cooperative basis with the engagement of all the countries. Okay. That's all I have for you on that, sir. Yeah.
One last question, I think.
Sure.
Yeah. No. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Simon Ateba from Today News Africa. My question is on Libya. What's the U.S. reaction to a report that once again black Africans are being sold into slavery in Libya? And finally, I would like to react to the transition in Zimbabwe and to a larger extent, what's the U.S. policy in dealing with people, African leaders who have been in power for a long time, like President Paul Biya of Cameroon, who has been there for 35 years, or Biangema Mbazogo of Guinea, who has been there for 38 years, and all of them. How will the Trump administration relate with these people who have been in power for almost 3-4 decades?
Well,
Thank you.
we support democracies, of course. So the United States is not going to force someone out of power as a general matter. I'll have to take your question bit by bit, and some of those we'll have to get back to you on because you brought up a lot of various countries and various leaders, and I want to make sure I get you the correct answer. In terms of Zimbabwe, we had been concerned by recent actions that were undertaken by Zimbabwe's military. We recognize that there was a democracy, and we've seen that democracy went in the right direction. In terms of Libya, and you asked about people being sold into slave labor. I certainly saw that report and is a major concern to the United States, a major concern to any human being when we hear of something like that that is happening in this day and age. I don't have any diplomatic conversations to provide to you at that time. I would imagine that that is an issue that the United States is reviewing very carefully and having conversations with its counterparts about.
That was our last question.
Oh, okay. We'll take one last question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Ukraine.
One last question. Okay.
Oh, who said Ukraine? Ukraine. Good.
Hi. How are you?
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for this opportunity to get the information from the first source. Well, I'd like to ask
well,
about...
not first. I just help facilitate.
Well, anyway, we got a lot of speculation.
My boss is the first source.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a lot of
Or the boss's
speculation,
boss.
so
Yeah.
thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, I'd like to ask about on which stage are we in possible providing the little arms to Ukraine? I perfectly understand the decision have to be approved by the White House, by the president, but okay, we got these publications, the articles in the press that possibly the Security Council has adopted the recommendation to provide the grant, 47 million grant to Ukraine. It might be from US Department of State money. So can you just provide the information on which stage are we? And secondly, and more important, we got the US military budget right now with 50 million to Ukraine, but it's just one source. From the second hand, it always was the US Department of State money. I spoke with a couple of staffers in the Congress. They told me the situation is unclear, that firstly it was zero, right now it should be some amount. Can you just give an update on this? Okay. Thank you.
So first off, Ukraine is a situation that we follow very, very carefully and very closely. The Secretary put in place Kurt Volker earlier this year to help try to manage the situation in Ukraine as best as possible. And he has made a lot of trips there. As you well know, President Poroshenko made a trip to Washington earlier this year, and the Secretary has made various trips to Ukraine as well. You ask about the issue of providing lethal assistance to Ukraine. We have not provided defensive weapons, but yet we have not ruled that out either. We just don't have a lot more to say on that. In terms of the funding that you ask about, I believe part of that would be a Department of Defense issue. Part of that, you indicated maybe a State Department issue. I don't have any comments on what members on the Hill said because I'm just not aware of what they told you. But that's all I have for you right now on that. Okay? Okay. Guys, we have to wrap it up. I'm sorry.
Very sorry.
Thank you
But
so
thank
much.
you all
It's
for
great
coming.
to see you all.